Hello and welcome to the Women and Gender Equality Commission's commemorative program on International Women's Day. It is our pleasure to welcome you today to a panel discussion in which a number of interested persons, organizations, and flagship holders on gender issues will be discussing issues of interest to gender and women in Guyana. I'm happy to have in the studio with me a number of persons who will be fielding questions and making comments on the subject. And without going any further, I'd like to introduce them. The first is Vidyaratha Kissoon, Justice Roxanne George, Karen DeSouza, and Indra Cnandrapal. They will now make opening remarks on the subject, beginning with Vidya.
Greetings, everyone. Greetings, colleagues on the panel and members of the audience and viewers out there. Happy International Women's Day to women. In my opening statements, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the current situation as it relates to violence and equality between men and women. And I wanted to bring into this discussion, into this room, just a couple of things that happened over this week. Now, 12 years after the Domestic Violence Act was passed, we had the National Domestic Violence Policy launched in 2008. And after that policy, we realized that it's good in Guyana that we have legislation and policy, but sometimes there isn't implementation. And in some of these experiences, which I wanted to share as why I'm here, it's just to reflect a little bit on what are the perceptions about women in Guyana and for us to talk about that. On Thursday evening, Professor Vereen Shepherd had a lecture about slavery as part of our commemoration of the 1763 slave rebellion. And, that discussion was about women in slavery and the torture and the punishment that many of the women who rejected slavery went through. And we hear, about women who were flogged, punished, beaten for resisting the norms of that time. We hear about Rachel being flogged for taking her child to work with her because she had no one to look after the child. But then that thing about flogging, on March the 1st, the day after Professor Shepherd's lecture, we read in Guyana Times about a girl child at Anna Regina Multilateral who has body aches all over her body because she was flogged in a state system. So you wonder after 200 years what's really happening with violence or attitudes to violence and how the state uses violence against women. On Friday as well, when the Commission of Inquiry report into Linden was released, we had this issue of Ron Somerset, he's killed, and his mother Margaret. She was described by the Commission as the most unimpressive of witnesses. And you have to ask the question, which woman in Guyana who has to quantify her child's life before this Commission? You have to ask the question, how does a commission of people say that she's not impressive? How does a woman supposed to communicate her grief? And I think, this is just the week before we celebrate International Women's Day in 2013, 200 years after many women watched in horror as their children were sold off into slavery, and they didn't even get to determine the value for themselves. And, this last week, just one other discussion I had with a policeman who was harassing a woman just outside the lecture, actually. And I had a gaffe with him about this, a lot of us subs off, babes off, and, a lot of men think it's okay they have an entitlement to tell anyone what they think about her. And asking this man, I said, do you realize as a police what your role is? And of course, reflecting on how the Commissioner of Police, Henry Green, when that issue was happening with him, when people said he was just pandering to his own humanity. And the policeman said, I'm a police officer, but I'm also human. So there's something about being human, this view that part of man's humanity is that you must treat women as you see fit. So I just wanted to bring that here into this discussion and for us to reflect a little bit about equality, how far we are on equality, even though we have legislation and policies, what's really happening in the society.
Okay, go ahead, Justice George.
Well, good day, everyone, and best wishes for International Women's Day. I just want to say that having worked on women's issues over a number of years, there have been many positive developments, especially in relation to our constitutional provisions and equality. We do have now the Women and Gender Equality Commission as one of our human rights commissions. We have the Domestic Violence Act, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, among others. But I think our main problem, and this links into what Vidya has just referred to, is that of awareness. Awareness by the public and awareness by what we may want to call the implementers of the legislation, the police officers, the justice system, the social workers, all of us as actors who have to sensitize persons about their rights and their responsibilities in relation to all the legislation that has been passed. So awareness is key, and we have to work on issues of implementation, and we have to also work, from my perspective, on public's knowledge of the justice system. We are sadly lacking in that regard, so that when persons come in to engage the system to seek justice, as we like to say in Guyana and around the world, there's sometimes a disconnect between what they believe or perceive and what will happen in actuality. So we have a lot of issues to work on.
Okay, thank you. Karen DeSouza of Red Thread.
Thanks. International Women's Day greetings. I just want to acknowledge that in terms of women's advancement, we have a very impressive body of laws, but we have a really dismal record of implementing those laws. If Vidya has referred to the Domestic Violence Act, which was assented in 1996, it's a lot of years, but we still are not fully using that act. And essentially, I would like to look at women's situation from two angles. One, from the point of view of violence and protections from violence and access to justice, and on the other, from an economic perspective. Notwithstanding all the laws about equality and so forth, we all have to acknowledge that certainly in Guyana, it is the women who have to carry the burden of the caring work in the home, taking care of the children and so forth. In our economic circumstances, we also expect that the woman has to go out to work. But as a society, there is very little provision for the care of children. And the result of that is what we can see around. The fact that many children under the age of 10, under the age of 7, are at home by themselves, essentially, very often are raising themselves because their mothers are out looking for food, trying to earn in order to keep them going. So I would say we have to pay much more attention to the income levels in the country. We have to make some very serious arrangements to ensure that the income levels necessary for survival are available to women who are raising children. And at the level of violence, there is a whole lot that has to be done. Vidya referred to the national policy after all these years. This year, the policy is supposed to be renewed, come to an end, but 5 years after it was approved, there is little, if anything, that has actually been implemented. So we're good at making the laws, we're good at doing the paper, but we're actually doing very little in terms of getting those things implemented.
Indra Cnandrapal, former Minister of Human Services and Women and Gender Equality Commission's Chair.
Thank you, Paloma. Members of the audience, my fellow colleagues. I probably would want to take a different line in my opening remarks and to say that Guyana has advanced in terms of women's rights, because we cannot only look at the problem in our society pertaining to violence alone. There are many other things that are taking place in our society. Women participation in economic development, women participation in decision making, advancement in the field of health and education, whether women access to housing, women access to water. I think probably we have to look in a holistic way in terms of how women have advanced. Having said that, I'm mindful of the fact that there are problems pertaining to women access to justice, because when the National Commission on our Commission on Women and Gender Equality, we've had programs in some regions of the country. There were many issues that were brought to our attention pertaining women access to justice. And these are matters that we are now raising with the respective authorities, because we recognize, for example, the sexual offenses bill. There are things that must be done in order to advance the process. We also are mindful of the fact that having had the domestic violence legislation and the domestic violence policy, there were a number of other things that were done. For example, I recall when we spoke, we had our Access to Justice program in Region 6. The police officers there and all who were present were telling us how they were able to grapple with the problem and the training that the police have received over time. Unfortunately, the difficulties we find that people do move on. So continuously, even though you have training programs, you're finding situations that because people are moving off from their respective jobs and there is continuous training that is going on. So I would say when you look at the gender improvement measures in terms of what exists in the world out there, we have done very well. I think we are about 35 in the world, looking at women participation in decision making in terms of education and health. But I would be the last one to say that we have done everything that we require to do, because I see what we're doing as a process. And so we have taken some necessary steps, but there's still a lot more work that has to be done.
Thank you very much. Well, you've heard it from the panel. And one of the things that I'd like to say is that one reason why people tend to problematize things, meaning speak in terms of a half empty glass instead of a half full glass, is because they're concerned and want to do better. So I think there is no doubt that Guyana has taken several steps to implement some of its own policies and some of its makes good on some of its own commitments, but people would like to see more. And I'm very happy that we're opening with a frank discussion on how we actually see these things and what we'd like to see happen. Well, we have a wonderful, small but very well, a high-quality audience, studio audience this morning, who will be joining us in the discussion and making comments and asking questions. They represent several organizations. So to start off the questions from the audience this morning, I'd like to ask Ms. Nicole Cole from the Women's Affairs, Women and Gender Equalities Commissions, and the Rights of the Child Commissions to ask her question, and then we will take two more, after which we will then ask the panel to respond, and then we will return to the audience. Ms. Cole?
Good day. How effective would you say the 1996 Domestic Violence Act has been, and is it still relevant in 2013? Thank you.
Okay, the next question, please.
Yes, good morning, and good morning to the Paloma and the panel. I would like to ask something specific to the National Development Strategy that was worked out, and that is concerning the recommendation in Section 25 that we have flexible work conditions. It was a key recommendation in order to establish family-friendly situations within the workforce to better allow women to be part of the formal workforce. It also applies to the informal work sector. There were some very good recommendations made under that particular section. It's Section 4. It talked about the ILO, which I don't think we've approved yet. They talked about ILO 156. I believe Red Thread has a petition out recently concerning domestic workers under that. But these were some, if you read the strategy, and that was over 10, maybe 12 years ago now. Sorry, it should have been implemented over the last 10 years. We are over the National Development Strategy now. I want to ask specifically about those conditions and as to whether the Commission or anyone else in Guyana is going to prepare another National Development Strategy to take up the things not accomplished in that first 10 years and where we go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a third question from the floor? Please pass the mic forward.
Good morning. In terms of access to justice, where women are concerned, one burning issue we have in our society is where women, along with their husbands or even their spouse, when they go to lawyers, they will collect their fees, and most of the time they are not being represented, and they are being told frankly by these lawyers they don't have the time. Sometimes, most of the times, they don't even turn up at the court. So I'm wondering, is there any law that can correct these lawyers, or is there a code of conduct where they should follow so that they should honor what they have, the agreement they would have gone into? Thank you.
Thank you. So three very, well, actually there are six questions because people are asking two questions at a time. But we will respond. The first has to do with effectiveness of the Domestic Violence Act. The second has to do with the National Development Strategy, which is what this whole discussion is supposed to be about, actually. So, and will there be another? And the third has to do with the question of access to justice and what remedies there are in law for people who are actually facing kind of problems with lawyers they contract. So who will answer?
If I go with Nicole's question, yes, absolutely. I think the Domestic Violence Act is totally relevant. We have to implement it. What we definitely need to give some attention to is a fine like $10,000 for breaching a protection order. $10,000 is not a deterrent to an abuser, so that needs to be looked at. We also have some interpretations of that section in terms of penalties for breaching the act. I've heard, my interpretation has always been that the penalty is, I don't remember if it's a year and $10,000, but I understand that in fact it's one or the other, not the two things together. And in fact, what we've seen in the couple of cases that have gone to court is the fine is $10,000, and that's the penalty, which does not encourage anybody to better behavior. So there are things that have to be done. And even though those provisions in the Act are still relevant, I think there are many other areas in terms of the difficulties that people have in various situations that have to be addressed. That the law actually does not cover, which speak more to how officials relate, how seriously officials take the offense of domestic violence. And that's not legislated for, but we have to continue doing the work with officials and with the public.
Ms. Cnandrapal?
I would probably, because Karen has referred to it, I don't want to only, as I said, I want to look at other issues. Coming back to the whole question of the National Development Strategy, there are persons here who would have been part of the process of helping in preparations of certain chapters. And I know that when the National Development Strategy document was prepared, went to the National Assembly. There was a second process in which an attempt was made to edit and also to implement some of these. I myself, I've looked at the National Development Strategy. As a matter of fact, I spent a lot of time on it last night looking at various areas. And I want to talk probably a little bit on when you look at the area of poverty, to know that from 1990, poverty based on the World Bank was 84% people living below poverty line. Today it is 39 to 43. Between that level, I don't know the exact. So you can say in that area you have seen improvements. When you look at women in the education sector, and we all talk about it whenever we speak to, and the information today, 59% women are coming out of the university, nearly 86% women coming out of Cyril Potter College. Those are positive things. When we look at women in the health sector, women access to health today, women access to credit, all of these are things that are happening. Women having the opportunity to be able to have access to housing. So there are things in the National Development Strategy, I believe, that policymakers have sought to work with. There is more, and I do believe there is need to do an evaluation of what was and where we are today, and I do believe it is something that the nation probably at some time will have to grapple with, because while the National Development Strategy document was intended as a roadmap for the country, I don't believe that in 10 years' time, all the things that we talked about in that document, we will be able to achieve it, because one must consider where we were as a nation, a highly indebted country, and we had to depend a lot on borrowing. We're still a poor, underdeveloped country. So while those ideals are lofty, they're not, it is not nobody's intention, and no one would expect that in 10 years or in 5 years you can achieve all these things. Is a process that we would have begun, but I do believe that there is much more that you have to do in order to achieve the desired results. So I do believe the evaluation must come. At what time, I don't know. But it's something certainly as a nation that we will have to assess.
Okay, so the second part of that question was whether we will be looking at another one. And maybe this is something, at creating an updated one or another one, this is something that may actually, a recommendation that might come out of this program or something, because evaluation is always good, and you really should have been doing kind of process evaluation as we were going along. But
in relation to the NDF, I don't know, Indra can probably be much more informed about this, but I actually don't have an awareness that this strategy was ever, there was ever concerted effort to implement this national development strategy or the national development plan. So Vanda's question about flexi time, I mean, I try to pay close attention to these kinds of developments, and I'm not aware that that has been implemented or really discussed at any part of the society.
Maybe in whatever was sought to do in the way the government, the different sectors will deal with their programs. They will not start out by saying that this is a national development strategy document we're focusing on. Because if you were to go all the different sectors, you would have seen a lot of things are happening. When you look in terms of women access to credit, micro enterprise, there are things that are being done, but I don't believe that policymakers are saying this is out of the national development strategy. They will not say that, but there are many features of the things that was said in the national development strategy are things that are happening. It's not as happening as fast as we would like it to happen, or maybe they're not stating it in that way, but certainly things are happening in the various sectors. And I'm coming back to when you talk about whether it has to do with agriculture, whether it has to do with your road transportation.
But the question, I think there's a specific
I don't know.
But labor, because remember you were in Ministry of Labor too?
No,
but
yes,
time, right.
but I have...
I mean, what's happening with women in work?
Okay.
Because the document had talked about, that was a question
The
about work.
flexi time, because it has to do with, because our laborers, the women who are working, they don't only work in the public sector, they also work in the private sector. So that is a discourse that must take place between the tripartite committee as well as the employer and the employees on both occasions. I am aware in the public sector that based on the discussions, women are, let us say, women who are going to the university, they have that, because I know my own, when I was a minister, we had to facilitate all prospective employees of the ministry who wanted to go to university. Arrangements of those types of arrangements were made to facilitate them. So there, some element of that is happening, but I cannot say in a widespread way how it is happening.
Okay.
If I could just interject here on all three issues. One, the Domestic Violence Act is still very, very relevant. As I said earlier, it's a question of implementation. We have to deal with that. On the flexi working conditions, I would want to say that based on my recollection of the mandate of the Women and Gender Equality Commission, in terms of the functions that are set out in the Constitution, maybe it is something that the Commission can pull out as an issue to try to address in either the short, medium, long term. So that what happens is, whether it's a necessity for some kind of research, because the Commission has that kind of capability to have research done, so we can start to engage and have the conversation about flexi hours, not only in the context of going to university, but in the context of you start work at 7 in the morning, go to 3, so that you can pick up your children at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all those kinds of combinations and permutations of things. In relation to the specific question on access to justice and the lawyers, that again is something I spoke about earlier about awareness, and therefore persons do not know that there is a legal practitioners committee. There are two separate, well, I shouldn't say separate committees, but there are two branches of the one committee. It is housed at the Court of Appeal, and members of the public can lodge complaints to the Legal Practitioners Committee. But again, that's an awareness issue that a lot of persons, so we have to get that kind of information out.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now ready for our second round of questions from the audience. Gentlemen in the back from the Men's Affairs Bureau.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, seeing that there seems to be a general consensus that not as much as we would have wanted to be accomplished from the National Development Strategy, if there's going to be some priority areas or a sequence of priority areas that assures us that solutions and implementations will be forthcoming. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question? Ms. Burton.
As we seek to address the topic of equal pay for equal work of value, can we say if at the level that it is stated within the National Development Strategy, where we seek to address under education the need for it to be implemented, the career teachings for girls to be able to take up work in non-traditional areas for women, can we say if at the level of the school system that has been implemented, where the career guidance program is now tailored to suit those needs?
Thank you very much. And the third question in this segment from the audience.
I want to salute all women on International Women's Day 2013. Women and Gender Equality Commission. How many regions that your work has been spread, and what was the impact? Thank you.
Okay, so we have our three questions, and to recap, one, the gentleman from the Men's Affairs Bureau is asking whether we can define some priority areas for moving forward with the NDS beyond what we have actually done so far. Then there's a question on the career guidance program in schools and what is being done to fulfill one of those NDS points with regard to channeling women into non-traditional vocations. And the third has to do with the work of the Women and Gender Equality Commission and their reach and spread and impact in the regions. Who is going to respond? Vidyaratha?
So I just wanted to just address on the side on the issue of the women in non-traditional work.
Yes.
This is what I'm aware of from the issue of advocacy is that there are some cases where they're taught and the girls are getting into some of the fields and so on, but it's not necessarily the school level that the problem is. It's what's happening within the actual work environment. And therefore, it's how, for example, in a traditional male-dominated engineering environment or so on, how would they welcome a woman who is another engineer or surgeon? I'm hearing all of this at different levels of the profession. God, you even hear it at the level of judges and all of that. So I think many of the girls are aspiring. Some of them are thinking of other things than they're seeing. I'm aware. I know, for example, like in computer science, which is my field. At UG for the last 3 years, the best grad has been a woman. The best graduating student in that department has been a woman, and that's something that we're tracking. So it's not, but then it's how what happens and the decisions, because in some of the technical fields, there's issues of child care and all of that. I mean, it's interesting. You have a woman in non-traditional roles. You also got to talk with the men in the non-traditional roles too, like child care and so on, and so on. So to help the woman who has to work night shift, So.
Minister? Yeah, I was going to say the Board of Industrial Training, for example, they have a whole lot of programs in which women are taught in the non-traditional areas. Yeah. So, but there will be challenges. I mean, I remember one of the ladies from the Women Lawyers Association, who was also, she started out as an engineer and making the point about the difficulties she had. And we've had many cases like that. So you have to start dealing with the attitude problem of how they will fit in this environment that they're seeking to go, the difficulties, and also the question of their own their access to whatever facilities that are there. I know there's a young lady who studied at Gaisuko Training School, for example, a fitter machinist, and she was the only one of her kind, but she could not really perform, because the environment in which she was operating was not an easy one. Mm-hmm. So therefore she had to leave that position or that vocation she was trained in to do a secretarial job. Okay. So that is something that we must be mindful of. But I would want to perhaps talk about the question of the National Development Strategy. We can only, as a commission, take the recommendations and forward them to policymakers in terms of what the recommendations that would have come out of here. And as was stated before, there is a need to do that evaluation. And certainly we can, in our recommendations, state that these are some of the areas. You have not cited the areas, so to speak, which are the specific areas, whether it is, let us say, in education or in health or wherever. So we can only assume that based on the general statements that are made here, in our response or our recommendations, we can say we believe there is need to have a relook at or an assessment or an evaluation of the national development strategies. When that evaluation would have been done, then we will be privy to the information. Let us say women access to health, for example, what the national development strategies stated and where we are all these years after. That has to be done. So I don't think our commission has that type of information to provide to anyone. And the specific question about what the Women and Gender Equality Commission has done in the regions, we are only 3 years, well, our third term is coming to an end in May, and we started out last year what we call our outreach program with the program Access to Justice, in which we sought to go to the different regions. Unfortunately, we were not able to conclude this program that we have had, and we still have outstanding Region 1, 7, and 8 that we said in this year program we will seek to do outreach program. So far, we have a sense of some of the issues that are affecting women across the country. We went to Region 9, the women spoke about the problems. We went to Region 6, Region 3, so we have a fair idea. Region 10, we have a fair idea about all the issues affecting women. The specificity in terms of what happens in Region 1, we don't have as yet. But our commissioners from time to time will share those with us. So yes, we will be going to the regions and we have an understanding of what obtains. As I said, we've now started 3 years in the life of an organization. It's not a long time to do all that is required. So we are trying to grapple with our own challenges as well.
Okay, is there any other comment from the panel? All right, the third set of questions, I see Magda Pollard.
I shall be very brief and say that I am of the view that with most of the areas, if not all, that have been mentioned this morning, some action has been taken. And I have the particular concern as to how one moves forward with the action. I also want to say that there's been a tremendous amount of migration from this country, and certainly personnel are not readily available. Also, many of the workers and the professionals and everybody are really deeply concerned about the cost of living, for example, and therefore their salaries and so on are in question. But at the same time, I have a feeling that what we need to do is to look at our implementation strategy. And I think the panel has dealt quite well with that in terms of bringing it to our attention. I would like to suggest that from our Women and Gender Equality Commission's position, and similar organizations which work on these issues, because we are not the only one, that we engage when we get the information and we have the information from the people, the communities, that we are able to have the time and the ability, sometimes there are no finances, that we can get our information arranged and done in such a way and that we contact two of the implementation agencies in the country, one of which is the Parliament and another which is the Cabinet. I think our commission and maybe any of the others, because as a democratic public we are able to speak with all, but I think that there is need for some coordination from the community to through our commission to say to the parliamentarians what's happening. And this is also required by our judges. I don't mean the legal judges. I mean the judges who judge our program at the international level. In other words, the persons who sit, I'm not sure if it is still 23 experts, and say to Guyana, you said you would do this now, you have not done it. What is the reason? And so on and so forth. So I think that our commission can really seek to have a strategy which, when we have gathered the information with what is required, we are able to engage the attention of the parliamentarians to take the recommendations further, as well as to the cabinet, because in any event, it is the ministerial level that will put in place what has to happen. That will be translated to the judges, to the judicial system, and every area will be covered to some extent. I think we really need to have that sort of moving up the ladder, because the Commission is not really able to implement any of those areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Magda Pollard, is there another question? Yes?
With respect to the strategy, I get in the sense that is whether we implementing the strategy or not. And I'm of the opinion that we don't know, because there seems to be a call for evaluation of the strategy, and that might be because there's no indicators of measurement if the strategy is being implemented, and where are we with respect to the implementation process and the indicators of measurement. One thing that is mentioned by Magna is that the periodic review for all the different sectors by the UN is probably one indicator that could be used with respect to how the state is doing with respect to all sectors. And I had privy of reading just recently the Convention on Rights of the Child, and there's so many recommendations with respect to how the state is doing on the various issues with respect to gender, as well as rights of children. And if we use that as an indicator, it could be used as a means of moving forward from where we are right now, but it will require the ambitiousness of all stakeholders to agree that this is what we need to do. I read in the same Convention on Rights of the Child review that the next report is due by 2018, and maybe all stakeholders in this People's Commission, the Rights of the Child Commission, Women and Gender Equality Commission, and other stakeholders, the Cabinet, the Parliament, should take on board what should we all do together to achieve the recommendations by the UN system, and that, in my opinion, would put into perspective what is happening with respect to children, gender issues, equality, economic issues, and all other issues that we are discussing here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final question. Ms. Lakan from the Ministry of Human Services.
Good day, everyone, and a happy International Women's Day to all the women across Guyana. I have a concern. I want to concord with all of my colleagues here this morning, but however, we're talking about coordination and implementation of work, and quite a lot needs to be done when it comes to coordinating by sectors, because I recognize there is a standalone chapter in the NDS that speaks to gender issues, and that's where my concern is, because why would we want to have a standalone chapter on gender issues? Because gender issues cuts across all sectors. And so I'm suggesting, however, that should there be an evaluation of the NDS that we have, and to have a new NDS, there should be a different approach where you don't have a standalone chapter, but include gender issues across all sectors and all chapters of the NDS. Thank you.
Good afternoon. More or less a comment, and just to perhaps reiterate and to highlight expectations based upon the comments from Ms. Pollard and my counterpart, Mr. Haynes. The CRC report, indeed, I think could serve as an indicator, and as it relates to all other reporting agencies, these forums will definitely bring to the fore some of the things we need to do. Suffice to say that as early as next month, there are going to be moves through the Office of the President, the Rights Child Commission, and UNICEF to bring all key stakeholders together to respond to a plan of action as it relates to the CRC recommendations.
Thank you very much. I see Vanda.
Coming back to the NDS, there was a mechanism that was recommended there, and that was that Guyana, in and of itself, establish annual human development reports that would, in fact, have looked at the National Development Strategy and what it proposed. There are some very, I think, clear and I think actionable recommendations that were made then. Just to remind people that the beauty of the National Development Strategy and the way that the second round was done was that it was led by civil society. You had 4 co-chairs, and for each of the substantive chapters identified, ministry officials were there participating, and the permanent secretary or someone mandated by that particular ministry was mandated to sit and to work, so that the uptake after it had gone to the Parliament was in fact, I think, done. And so some of the achievements came out of the fact that you had civil society and you had the governmental ministries responsible for implementing government actions sitting at the same table and working together. I think it is a win-win strategy in terms of the way the strategy was made, and that is why I believe it is important, now that we have the LCDS on board, to take where that is and to combine it with something that has human rights and human development, which is what is at the core of the National Development Strategy combined. I think it is necessary to be done. And just to end by saying that the private sector was a part of that strategy in a significant way. And that some of the questions alluded to here, certainly mine, concerning the Family Act or the family law, which needs serious reconsideration. It's fragmented. It was stated in the NDS as being fragmented. It is even, I believe, more fragmented today. So something as basic as that, along with flexi time and conditions for equal pay for equal work, for making the work situation female friendly. It is not in Guyana, as has been said. Those are things the private sector need to take up with some responsibility, and in fact it is not. Let us ask ourselves, where are the daycare facilities in every single private sector business? Where are they? Where is the flexi time? Where are the programs for sensitizing its own workforce in terms of gender rights and human rights and child rights? And I can't resist but finally say that the situation of flogging that Vidya started off, if we continue to take what were slave mechanisms for correction and put them into or keep them in our schools in a thing like corporal punishment, then my sisters and brothers, we have no place to go but down in Guyana. And I wish that Guyanese would put aside all this backward thinking that to beat a child is to create a disciplined society. It has not worked. The US of A has corporal punishment. It is there on its statute books. Very few of its states have adopted it. It's the most violent society in the world. Let us think about that. People think the USA is violent because they don't beat children or they don't have corporal punishment or they don't. It's just a big fallacy. And we need to look at societies that are violent endemically. Jamaica is one. I don't think they have any corporal punishment that is reduced. And we are heading there. I am a teacher, and people here are teachers. We know in the 70s when I was trained, and currently in the Cyril Potter system of education, alternative mechanisms for discipline, growing human minds in a human way is part of what education is about. It is not about beating. It is not about enacting slave mechanisms for correction that is going to move us forward. So I think that is also something that all the commissions, not just the Child Commission, needs to examine in Guyana as a basis for how we are going to grow our society to the finest tenets of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think six actually very good contributions. Would the panel respond, please?
So there are many important points. Implementation. One of the things I know from civil society, and Vanda mentioned that the NDS was a civil society document. And I think to talk about civil society and the work on violence, it's also to celebrate that there are many groups and organizations that have taken it upon themselves to try to address, perhaps in an uncoordinated way, which might limit the work, but certainly, to try to address violence in different ways, and that has its problems. So you see that even within agencies, so like even within the police, there are police who are trained and would like to do the things properly, but there's an absence of leadership to encourage them to do it, and sometimes there's resistance to those police, and those police are caught up in the same thing. I think we were talking about that. So all of the time is just to encourage civil society to work on, the official bodies might not be dealing with these issues. It's for us to work with it. Certainly on the issues of violence and beating children. Again, there's work. There are parents who are doing work. There are organizations working with parents and many teachers who don't want to beat. They're trained, go back into a school system where people said that was for college, it doesn't have for now. And we know that there's violence in the schools, and there's a great myth in Guyana that people don't beat children in schools. And that's why we have this miserable, violent place. And, so that is, all of that we need to talk about and to raise, I think, as part of this. Sexual harassment, sorry, we didn't talk about that. No. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I thought it was closing.
You don't not a closing statement
sorry,
yet. Go ahead. Responses. You want me to recap? But basically, I think these were generally recommendations coming from the floor and not really questions and information about what is happening, how people think we need to move forward in terms of assessment, what mechanisms might be in place, and some that can be used right now for assessing the impact of the NDS and also indicating, I'm very thankful for Vanda's point about how the NDS basically emerged, and I think how it was likely to be implemented across the board. So that Ms. Cnandrapal's point about it not being a separate thing that you can actually say, well, this is NDS, but it actually a diffused mechanism, in fact. But we need to, I think, find a way to at least evaluate what has happened since then. An implementation strategy is always good for any plan. And certainly several years down the line, it would appear that Guyana has in fact moved up to several notches on the UN index, especially with regard to women and human rights. So I don't know how far, but I know we have.
If I could just add,
yes.
Paloma, to say then that it's a question of tying it all in, because I'm aware that the Women and Gender Equality Commission is now trying to develop their strategic plan.
Yes.
So it's a question of having the linkages between the National Development Strategy, I guess the Poverty Reduction Strategy,
LCDS,
and all of those things. So, I mean, it will take some time, it will take some work and some political will, so to speak, to get it done. But I can see us trying to bring the strands together, or the spokes of the wheel, so that we get the hub going.
And one point I want to make, I know Ms. Cnandrapal wants to say something, and I will allow her to do that. But the point is, when we sit and we discuss these issues, a lot of the issues are issues of culture and how we see things, how we perceive things, what we do as a society. And while it's all well and good for us to sit here, those of us who may be opinion leaders and who are working, we also have to ask the question and hold the general public and society, every person accountable, and say, well, okay, what are you doing, every day to help a woman, to give some respect to your female teacher, to your grandmother, to your wife, to your girlfriend, to your daughters? What are you doing? What are we doing to hold people accountable even? Because those things are also issues of culture. Right? We meet in a room and we argue and we say, well, okay, this is not being done. But as Karen is saying, when the time comes for us to put our names on a line and write a petition or sign a petition and say, we don't agree with this, or this is not happening, we don't do that. So that's part of our social responsibility as well, and part of what is really necessary for changing the culture for all of us, because women and men make up the society. You cannot fly on one wing. So it is for all of us to take responsibility and take charge of this. Minister.
Okay, I want to perhaps respond in support of the point that was made by both, I think, all three speakers, whether it was Ms. Pollard, Mr. Autry Haynes, Mr. Boston, with respect to the process of moving, let us say, all the information, the evaluation of our respective commissions in terms of the conventions that we have signed on to. Magda referred to the convention, this CEDAW, for example, and that we presently in the commission, we have a lot of work to do because, as we know, the conventions require us, having signed on to them, you are supposed to satisfy a number of mandates. And the collaboration of civil society and government in all these processes can help to, bring all the players on board to evaluate completely or together where we or the things we would have done. And I think this is something now we're trying to grapple with in terms of the ministry and our commission to see how we can work together to ensure. And I do believe the same principle will have to be adopted by the other commissions as well, in terms of that collaborative way to make sure that at the end of the day, the views of civil society out there, NGOs and so on, and government, they are in sync in terms of what obtains. I do support the point also made by Magda and Roxanne with respect to the National Development Strategy. The fact of the matter with poverty reduction strategy and LCDS, all these are different strands of things that are happening. We don't say it has emerged out of the National Development Strategy, but are different platforms or different strategies that have emerged in different ways. And so different things are happening, and I do believe maybe the time has come that that evaluation must take place so that we can really assess where we are. But you know what? I am not at all. I don't feel negative and hopeless about things, because when we look around and look what has been happening, a lot of things have been done. But we need to work to correct some of the things that are doable and can be done. And like, for example, when we went to coming back to the access to justice programs, looking at the different regions, what we found it is that leadership at the respective levels in the region, whether it has to do with the commanders at the police station, whether it has to do with the person who is at probation, at the end of the day, it's about people making the right choices and taking the right decisions in terms of doing the job that they are required to do. Some do it to the best of their ability and others don't do it. And when they fail, then there are things that will happen, especially in terms of whether it has to do with violence against women, sexual harassment. We find that policymakers or lawmakers or whoever was employed to do the job, when they fail, then we have difficulties. And therefore, I do believe all of us as citizens have a role to play. And this is what we need to work more closely with civil society and everybody and say, hey, all of us are involved in what is intended to do to develop our country. You can't have a few working harder and others only criticizing. It has to be a collaborative effort. And without that, we will not be able to do what we're required to do.
All right, thank you very much. I have been signaled some time ago that we're out of time. I'd like to give the panel 30 seconds each for final comments. 30 seconds. I'm going to be waving my hand like this, right? When your time is up. What if you had to wave a wand for women in Guyana? What would you like to see done? 30 seconds. Video.
Well, I'd like women, especially, and men, to not beat their children, and to do as you said, Paloma, start with saying, I will not beat my child, and I will learn how to do that. And I'd like men to say that we will not harass women on the streets, and say that to themselves and not do that.
Cool.
I endorse what Vidya said, and just to say that in terms of the Women and Gender Equality Commission, I do look forward to it's getting to the point where it can really implement a lot of what is stated in the Constitution, and that the complaints mechanism that is part of its mandate, that kicks in within the short term.
Karen.
And hopefully that they don't just receive complaints, but have the capacity to investigate and take action in relation to those complaints. I would like to see us not making judgments based on statistics and numbers, So we have 1/3 women in Parliament. I'd like us to know that 1/3 representation in Parliament actually represents women and actually represents something about equality. We don't have that. We have to look at the class issues and what's happening with poor women, all the access is for those professionals and middle class people.
Miss Cnandrapal.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say that from the Women and Gender Equality Commission perspective, yes, we would love to have much more resources, both human and financial, to do all the things that the Constitution mandates us to do. Unfortunately, there is not a tree out there, a money tree that we can shake to have all the money that we need.
So you wish for a money tree.
So I wish that we can win the lotto, or we can have all the resources we have to do all the things that we are required to do.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I'd like to thank our distinguished panel and our well-informed and very caring members of the studio audience. Thank you very much for joining us. And we hope as this day continues and throughout the rest of the year, that it's not only that we remember women and what women's rights are today, that every single day, each one of us carries this forward, because we want, in the end, all of us, a caring, well-adjusted, prosperous, and happy and safe Guyana. Goodbye.